This episode is brought to you by the Solent Sky Museum, preserving aviation heritage for future generations.
On the show tonight, we're talking about American Warbirds, recovering a Spitfire from a Norwegian mountain, and airline-themed hotels, all washed down with a swig of gin. Hello and welcome to the Aviators Lounge, a brand new programme all about everything to do with the historic world of aviation. And joining me tonight, I've got Tony Dyer, grumpy flight test engineer from from the Air Defence Collection. We've got Ian Hewitt here, who is the CEO of Spitfire Heritage Distillers.
Hello.
And the co-founder of the Spitfire Heritage Trust. And we've got the writer, Henry Simpson. And we're broadcasting tonight here from the Solent Sky Museum in Southampton. Tony, it's been an exciting summer for you. Not only have you got married,
Yes.
visited Disney World,
Yes.
but I gather you've also been clocking up your warbird hours.
Yes, yeah, well I do 2.5 weeks every year. The Collins Foundation, which is the Wings of Freedom tour, which goes around America.
I've seen some pictures of you on Facebook. There's a great picture here, if we just bring this up here. This one here. This to me,
Yeah.
that is a happy man. And this is you. What? This is you in the back of.
This is the P40, which the Warhawk or Kitty Hawk in RAF service.
So how do you get to be on the tour in the back of that aircraft?
Well, I volunteer. I basically do whatever they want me to, which within reason, obviously, not in the biblical sense. So I polish aircraft. I help them change oil, and that's a very dirty job. I do whatever they need.
The Collins Foundation, what's actually, it goes on tour. This is a collection of aircraft that goes on tour.
Yeah, basically it's based out of Stowe, Massachusetts, but the aircraft live down in Florida, and they spend 300 days of the year touring around the whole of America. Right. And they've got a B-17 Flying Fortress, a B-24. It's the only combat-equipped B-24 Liberator. They've got a TF-51 Mustang, which can do pilot instruction on. The P40 is twin seat and also fully kitted out in the back with controls, and you can do pilot instruction on that. And then there's B-25, which is close to my heart because I do flight engineering on that. And so
I was taking this other photograph of you that you put up on Facebook. I do like your Facebook photographs. And this is you, or this is taken by you. This is in the P-51, yeah?
Yes, it is, yeah.
And this is over LAX. This is Los Angeles airfield. So that's remarkable. Do you think you could do that over Heathrow?
No. The kind of funny thing is you can actually see the Norwegian aircraft that we were going, both the pilot and I were flying back to get to LAX. And I had more luggage space in the P-51 than I did with my Norwegian airline ticket, which I think is hilarious, really. But
so that's the way to. So that's real luxury flying. If you want to forget the biz jet, you go for a P-51.
You've got to fly in a Mustang.
Excellent, brilliant. Sounds great. Right, now you are an avid collector of all things aeronautical, and what have you brought in for us tonight to have a look at?
Right, my show and tell. Okay, well I'm not going to tell you too much.
We're going to make this feature Tony's show and tell.
I'm not going to tell too much about this because I'd like people to sort of have a think about it.
Right, so we've got a plaque here, a brass plaque.
Right.
Yeah.
So basically, do you want me to tell?
Let's let's go through it. Yeah.
What this is a plaque that was given every time people raised money to buy a Spitfire, which was about £5,000 in those days' money. What would happen is they get one of these plaques or plaques, and so it says in the hour of peril, and then it would say.
So this is actually presented to the person then who's
yes, or the company, right. Or the town even, so Hendon.
Yeah, and you see all these, so a lot of these Spitfires, they had names on them, didn't they? Yeah, from the Hendon Spitfires quite near.
That's it, yeah. The Hendon sponsored 3.
Wow.
One of them was called Pegasus, which is quite a well-known.
It's remarkable, isn't it? I can't imagine the British public getting together to try and sponsor sort of Typhoons today, or pay for a nuclear submarine.
Well, there still is a presentation aircraft, because Lady McRoberts' Reply is normally a bomber in RAF service.
Oh, right.
So up until the Tornadoes recently retired, there was a McRoberts Reply.
Oh, wow. Didn't know that.
Well, that's quite a long story, that one.
But this is a plaque, right.
Yeah, so this one was Dean Smith and Grace Limited. what they did is they banded together and got enough money to pay for one Spitfire aircraft, as it says, in 1941. And then what would happen is one of the aircraft would be allotted as a presentation aircraft. So with this, it was a Mark II Spitfire built at Castle Bromwich Aircraft Factory, and it was P8162. And a lot of these aircraft didn't have very long careers.
Yeah, I read about this sometimes. So you find that some of these presentation aircraft literally lasted for a couple of days or so.
Yeah.
So all that money raised, and then, and then
this one actually did pretty well. It basically ended up with a squadron where it was damaged, unfortunately, in a landing accident, and then went and was repaired by a civilian repair unit in Cowley, in Oxfordshire. Went back to 416 Squadron, where it flew convoy operations and was damaged in operations.
Presentation Spitfires then. Ian, that's something, let's move on to you, because you, as Spitfire Heritage Distillers, you produce Spitfire Gin and Supermarine Vodka, which we've sampled tonight, which has been great fun. Chin chin. And in fact, actually, the first time I tried Spitfire Gin was at Flying Legends Air Show at about 10:30 in the morning.
Excellent.
Without any breakfast, which was, hit me like
Yes, I remember.
I don't. And of course, Supermarine Vodka. And of course, we're only literally about a quarter of a mile away from the Supermarine factory. You are also the co-founder of the Spitfire Heritage Trust, which has had some things to do with presentation Spitfires. We'll talk to you in a second about that. And according to your website, I like this, you are described as a builder of brands and a teller of stories.
Yes.
And I believe your connection all starts with the Spitfire, starts with actually with a children's story.
Yes. When my children were born, I decided that I would always tell them bedtime stories. And as I spoke to my friends and the dads, I realised that they didn't. So I thought, I'm going to write a book that actually will get men to want to actually read a story, so a bedtime story for children. And so I decided to actually make that book more relevant to the reader than the listener, because the listener is going to pick up whatever. And so I thought, I set out with, and I needed something in the story that would link and one, get the child excited, but more importantly, get the reader excited, the dad excited. So I thought,
I can say as a dad, if you get the buy-in from the dad, you're there.
Exactly. So I thought, well, what's going to get most men excited? And I'm talking about most men I knew. And I thought, right, well, if I stick a Spitfire in there. So the story was basically about the relationship between a grandfather, his grandchild, and the grandchild hears a sound which is a Merlin engine every Christmas, and you think he's talking about Santa, but he's not. And he goes to his granddad and asks him what's the sound, and so he kind of lets him into a secret that basically when he was given his release papers from the RAF, he couldn't leave his Spitfire behind, not after everything they'd been through. So on his last mission, he never came home, and the Spitfire's hidden out in the barn, and the little boy calls it his granddad's dragon. And the illustrations done by a lady called Kaylee Radcliffe are very much, they're quite dark, and so all the characters have got animals' heads, birds' heads, and I would say that Hayley's works like, she's a bit like Beatrix Potter on acid. I
like that. I was going to say, so how do you get from then a kid's book to Spitfire Gin? I can see that because I've read quite a few kids' books, and a gin follows shortly afterwards.
Pre-launching the book, I wrote to the Spitfire Society and asked them to check some details, they called me back. It was a chap called David Spencer Evans, the then chairman, and he basically said, I think this is great. Would you consider launching at the Spirit of the Spitfire Festival at Poleston Lacey? We did. It rained solidly for 3 days, which meant I spent 3 days in a marquee with David, and we forged a really great friendship. But more than that, David told me a story about a little country landlocked by South Africa called Lesotho, and Lesotho had given more money per head of population, nice link, to build Spitfires. So the people of Lesotho were very much part of that story. And I thought, well, one, what a great story, what a great example of international aid not being a one-way street. And I was one of those good punks in the 70s. I was into Rock Against Racism and the Anti-Nazi League, so I've always liked to campaign. So I thought, we could do something with this, because the Spitfire to me wasn't just... I was enamored by the Spitfire more as a designer than from its abilities as an aircraft. I just thought that this was just such a stylish piece of design. And then you hear the story of R.J. Mitchell and the pressures he was under with his health and saving the survival of the free world on his shoulders. An incredible story. And the Spitfire to me was as much about the morale that it gave to the British public. You know, if you you collect those pans and melt them down, they'll go into Spitfires. They didn't, but the fact is, people were working in the fields. It enabled people to handle the size of the problem, because they had their own bit of responsibility from working in the fields to collecting pans. And the Spitfires, to me, never stopped having that incredible skill. So what the Trust did, because there's far better people at keeping Spitfires in the air than we will ever be, what the Trust does, it's more concerned with that intellectual aspect, that cultural aspect. And so it's a very powerful platform to have conversations with young people about subjects which are depressing, that we still have to talk about, such as racism and sexism. You approach those those subject matters, and talk about the Caribbean pilots, the Polish pilots, the women pilots of the ATA. You can touch on those subjects, but you're touching on those subjects in a very safe environment, and any child that has got those views, that's passed down anyway. And so we're not saying your relative is a terrible person. We're just saying we agree with him about the Spitfire, but he might be a bit skewed on some of his other views. So it's a more gentler approach, and it's more likely to be passed back up the line.
Indeed.
So that came because I wrote a children's book.
Well, they say every day's a school day, and I must admit, when I was preparing for this, I never realised that Lesotho had bought one Spitfire, let alone 24.
Absolutely.
24?
Yeah, 24, yeah.
Wow.
2 squadrons.
Which is absolutely incredible.
Remarkable. Right, so let's move on. Henry, let's move down to the end of the table now. Henry, you are a pilot and writer for the Air Owners and Pilot Association magazine. Your Twitter feed this describes you as pilot and something of an adventure seeker. And to be quite frank, I'm getting sick of looking at your Facebook pictures, because it was Hong Kong last week, New York a couple of weeks before that, pictures of you in a Lancaster, and actually at the top of your Twitter feed is you with Kate Middleton, is it?
Yes, I was guard of honour for the Duchess of Cambridge when I was in the cadets.
Oh wow, well, that sounds great. Tell me about the TWA Hotel though. I saw these pictures and I thought that looks amazing.
That was fantastic. So I went to New York recently and went to the TWA Hotel. It's a new establishment, but it is the original 1962 TWA Flight Centre. That's its sort of core. That's been restored.
So on these pictures, when you were going in, I saw these pictures of you sort of checking in. You're almost checking into like the...
Yeah. So when you check in for your room, it's like the baggage drop at an airport, but in the 1960s.
Oh wow.
Shall we just get our coats?
Yeah.
I was going to say, well, no, hold on. I want to talk to my executive producer here, because we need to fund a trip to this. This sounds very good, actually. Yeah. And they've got an aircraft there. They've got a Constellation, is it?
They've got a Starliner, the last of the Constellation line, beautiful 4-engined classic airliner. The whole thing is parked sort of on the apron in front of the old terminal building, and it's a bar, so it's
that's even better.
Does it stock Spitfire gin?
Have a
word. Oh, I think that whole period of air travel is just, I mean, as far as it's so iconic, isn't it? It's that real catch me if you can kind of period.
Oh, yeah, that was filmed actually at the TWA.
I didn't realise that.
That's where they filmed it. The old sort of walking tunnels and walking tubes was where they filmed that film, and that's now part of the hotel. You walk along there to get your room. So.
Oh, great! You didn't fancy slipping into a uniform and trying to steal a
707.
Great, excellent. Right, well, let's move on to a bit of news then. As we know, the historic aviation scene is growing right the way across the world. Right the way across the world, in Russia, in America, all over the place at the moment. Tony, out of all the things that have been going on, what's caught your eye recently?
Well, I don't think we can, I know this is very Spitfire-centric at the moment, but I don't think we can pass on the Silver Spitfire and the fact that it's epic. It really is amazing. It actually brings in a lot what you were saying.
So this is the Silver Spitfire. This is the Boltby Flight Academy's aircraft.
That's it, the Boltby Flight Academy aircraft. It's being flown by two of the pilots there, Matt Jones and Steve Brooks. And they're taking it in turns, and they've got a support aircraft.
And they're where are they at the moment? Because they're halfway. I know they got to America.
Fairbanks, Alaska.
They're Alaska already.
Yeah.
Because they took off in August, was it?
Oh my goodness, yes, it was. It was sort of mid to late. No, third week of August, wasn't it?
And of course, it's the Silver Spitfire because it's been stripped back to bare metal, hasn't it? Which is somebody pointed out to me the other day about this. They said with having the silver aircraft, you really see the shape of the Spitfire.
Wow, you do.
Of course, you go to an air show. Usually, a Spitfire's in camouflage, which is designed to break up the shape of the aircraft. So actually seeing it in that lovely silver is wonderful.
It's absolutely fascinating because it does exactly what Ian was talking about. It's silver. It looks absolutely gorgeous. It's had extra fuel tanks put onto it.
And it's not, I mean, the Spitfire's not an endurance aircraft, is it?
No, it's had to have those. And obviously, it's lightened as well. The aircraft, again, has got a cracking history. It was built in, I forget, but it's a Mark 9, entered service in 1943, I think. And it's done 51 missions.
So it's got combat history as well?
Yeah,
wow.
So it was involved in right through August 1944. It was actually involved on D-Day as well.
Wow.
Like a lot of Spitfires, after the UK had finished with it, it went to the Royal Netherlands Air Force and then soldiered on with them until 1954. It then came back it then spent quite a bit of time in various assorted museums and then ended up being brought back to Duxford, I think about 2006, where it sat for quite a long time in one of the hangars, looking a bit forlorn. And they bought it, and the work they've done to it is epic. We're talking multi-million-pound epic, very original Spitfire.
Yeah.
You can see your face in it. It's not silver, it's polished.
Now, you were telling me about a friend of yours out in America who went to go photograph of this.
Yes, yeah. My friend got there and took one of the best photographs I've ever seen of Spitfire in the sunset. And his friend got there too late. And it was best described as, by that time, it was surrounded by cones and wrapped in a large body condom. So he was a bit disappointed. He took a photograph, but it's not really good.
Come to me once that.
Yeah, that's ultra safe, isn't
Sounds
it?
like another story.
For another show.
Yeah. Right, and let's move on from Silver Spitfires to Sandy's Spitfire. Ian, one of the projects you've been involved in is the recovery of Spitfire AA810, otherwise known as Sandy Spitfire. This was a photo reconnaissance Spitfire shot down over Norway in 1942. Last year, a team from the UK, including yourself, went out to Norway and recovered the airframe. That must have been a great adventure.
It was incredible. I mean, the story of Sandy, it's a heck of a story. I mean, he was 21 when he was given the mission to fly from Wick to Norway to photograph the Tapis. He was shot down. He was in one of the very early PRU Spitfires, so he was shot down. He crashed on the mountain. The Spitfire blew up. He actually managed to he didn't eject. He pushed back the canopy and jumped out at the last minute, and he survived. Landed in the snow. The Germans interrogated him for 2 weeks. They didn't realise that the PRU existed, so they just thought there must be a secret station in the Arctic Circle because Spitfires can't fly this far.
Oh, right.
The interrogation sounds ominous, but in Sandy's diaries it actually just say, well, actually what they did is they got me drunk every night and hoped I'd talk. So it wasn't too bad, you know.
There's another connection to Spitfire Gin here again, isn't there? Yeah.
So he then was sent to Stalag Luft 3. He joined the tunnelling committee. He was part of the Great Escape, but unfortunately he was one of the 50 who were captured and then executed. And basically I was driving, being driven, because I'm one of those chaps who doesn't drive. Nothing to do with alcohol, I might add. And I got an email picked up and basically said, hi, you don't know me, my name's Tony Hoskins, I have a project to retrieve a Spitfire, would you like to learn more? And I thought, so I literally rang him there and then, and he basically said, look, we're going out to Norway to hopefully see what is left of Sandy's Spitfire up a mountain. Would you like to finance the trip? Or part of the trip? And I basically said, well, yes, but I have one condition, and that's that you take a overweight 50-something man with you, and it's me. And so
you got a lot of the aircraft back. And it's being restored now then?
Yes, we brought it back effectively in pieces, in rucksacks, and we had half the engine block strapped to the back of this Norwegian lad he reminds me of you, but a bit bigger. He was young enough and big enough and daft enough to think he could do it. So
that bit doesn't remind me of me.
Tony, you've got a family connection actually with photographs from the Tirpitz, haven't you?
Yeah, a bit later though, because the PR4 was basically a modified Leighton's Mark 1 Spitfire.
So that's how you basically, when you say PR, that's photo reconnaissance,
photo reconnaissance
Spitfire. But what you to take a Spitfire and turn it into a photo reconnaissance?
Yeah, you took off all the armour, you took off anything that could go bang bang. Yeah. So guns, you put in the extra fuel in the bays, in the gun bays. You did everything. You put a fuselage tank in, and so later, when the two-stage, two-speed Merlin, because it was powered by an early Merlin in the PR4, came along, that could fly higher and faster. So they were more difficult to capture or catch. And my grandfather was a Catalina pilot based out of Sullom Voe in north of Scotland. And one of his job, was to fly over to Murmansk, and they spent quite an interesting weekend with vodka.
Yeah.
And waiting waiting for the PR Spitfires to take photographs of the Tirpitz. Because the whole thing about the Tirpitz and the pocket battleships is they couldn't be used because they were kept at bay in the fields. And that was brilliant. If they'd actually come out, life would have been very difficult. And they were kept in, Hitler was scared of losing his capital ships. Anyway, my grandfather went up there, and the whole idea was that the Spitfires would take the photographs, prove that it was in the field, and the only aircraft that had the legs to carry it all the way back to the UK was the Catalina. So they then flew the pictures back to Blackpool, and where a photo reconnaissance Mosquito then flew it down to the base of a lot of photo reconnaissance aircraft at RAF Benson. And that then was used for Operation Source, which was the X-craft mini submarines that unfortunately damaged it but did not finish it off.
Amazing the job that these photo reconnaissance Spitfires did. They were really they're almost unsung heroes really, but they were going deep into enemy territory with no armament and just literally their wits about them, and speed was their only defence really.
We managed to instigate a debate in Parliament.
That's not difficult these days.
Well, yeah, but this one's actually we're making a bit of sense.
Surprised they had time.
We're basically lobbying Parliament and various MPs behind us to have a national monument to the PRU.
Well, we can get right behind that.
That
sounds
interesting.
pretty good.
But that's, as I say, that's been debated in Parliament.
How do we follow the story? The Sandy Spitfire's got its website, hasn't it?
Yes.
And you can support the restoration actually through Spitfire Gym, can't you?
You can support directly through the website. You can buy Tony's book, Sandy Spitfire. You can buy benefactor certificates through our website, Spitfire Heritage Distillers website. But yeah, it was the stuff of like Boys Own.
Oh, great.
It was so exciting because we didn't really know what we were going to find when we got there. And I have to say, it was funny because Tony, he's an engineer. So Tony turned up, when we first met the Norwegian team. The Norwegian team were all stood there like hardened mountaineers, they knew their stuff. And I'd been to go outdoors because and everything brand new. and then we had the two historians, the two Marks, who were both dressed in 1980s ex-army gear. Tony had got his steel toe cap boots on and a pair of jeans. And then we had Peter Arnold, who was dressed like he was walking his dog on the Surrey Downs. And we got out of the van and we were like, hey guys, and you could see them thinking, I hope these guys know about Spitfires because they don't know anything about mountaineering. But yeah, so we made our way up there and we started digging. It actually, the local reports of where it was and where we believed it was, it actually wasn't there. It was about 12 metres away and in a completely different configuration. So as we started finding bits. Initially, we were like, we'd follow that line because we assumed the cockpit was over there, but actually it was over there. And throughout the whole process, we found the position, and there was a great photograph of like the hole that we left in the end, where we got all these bits that all went into rucksacks.
How big was the sort of spread of the debris?
It was quite wide. It was quite wide. Well, it was quite wide, but you definitely did get the sense of the aircraft. But if you think about a Spitfire in rural Norway in the 1940s, that was a very advanced bit of kit. And for the farming community, it was a very, in rural Norway, all that aluminium, all those bolts, motors, etc., a lot of that got repurposed. And so we've been running an amnesty, and the Cernadal community are fantastic. So you get these guys coming in and they're like, well, my granddad's water pump doesn't work anymore, but there you go, you can have that bit back, And the favourite one was a Zondat motorbike and sidecar that was left by the Germans, and the local postman commandeered it, and it delivered the post in Cernadal for 40 years. And at some point in the 60s, something major went wrong with it. So what did he do? He went up the mountain, came back with a piece of the engine, and he turned it and put it back in the Zondat. And then it operated for another 20 years or so. Part Merlin-powered Zondat. So,
That's pretty good.
Excellent.
Well, I like the amount of stuff that's actually being put into it to make it nice and original. Because Tony's been looking for cameras everywhere.
That's right, yeah.
And he's turned up some stuff.
People have been incredibly supportive and generous. As I say, we're working on the monument to the pilots. We're opening the Sandys Academy. It's an aviation academy at Cranfield University. So there's lots going on around it, and it's very exciting. It's been a great thing to have been involved in. It's a great thing to continue to be involved with. And as I say, that memory of being up on the mountain and just finding bits of Spitfire,
that sounds terrific.
It was amazing.
Well, you're going to have to come back and talk to us about this a little later when you've got it, more of it, bits and pieces. It sounds really interesting. We'll have to follow this story. Excellent. Right, Henry, our roving reporter, what's caught your ear, or your eye rather, in the hangars recently? You're a man who seems to pick up on these things.
Yes, well, we've mentioned Russia with Murmansk, and one of the things from there is two Tupolev Tu-2s, the sort of Second World War twin-engined fast bomber, a bit like a sort of Soviet equivalent to a Mosquito. Two of them have turned up in Russia. The plan is for one of those to be restored to flight. But what's quite interesting is that comes on the back of news that we had last year, that up to 8 examples were brought into the UK and are somewhere around in the UK, with one of those going to be restored to flight. So this is a return from sort of flying extinction.
That's interesting. Now there is this push in. I mean, we see lots of Spitfires and Hurricanes getting back in the air, but there's now this kind of this push to getting sort of this more exotic kind of aeroplanes and stuff, like things like Russian aircraft, especially Second World War stuff, back in here. It's interesting to see that. So
it's going to be a really interesting addition to the Warbirds scene, largely because there's not so many Soviet types.
No, it's a pity that that's the case. And the Sturmeffects, there's only one flying, isn't there?
I think there might be two or three now.
Okay. So that's still not enough when you work out.
No, when you consider that they're about the most mass-produced aircraft in history, there's only 3 left.
Yeah. And we touched a little bit on equality, and Soviet forces were the first really to have women in any role whatsoever in their armed forces.
Well, the Night Witches with their PO2s.
Wasn't it? Isn't there a famous line in the Dam Busters book when they talk about the one of the squadrons went out and they got looked after by some Russian women, but the chaps behaved themselves because the Russian women gave them a demonstration of how they could lift a man with each arm or something.
Yeah, well, to me as well. I often joke about my step-grandmother, who was Russian, and not step-grandmother, my step-grandmother's relative, Auntie Olga. And when I was 3 years old, Auntie Olga came over to the UK, and she was a staunch communist, and she managed to get a visa to come over. And I can remember this, 3 years old, and I remember it. She was bouncing me on her lap, and she opened her mouth, and I can still see it when I close my eyes. She had a full set of stainless steel teeth. And she was a tank driver.
Tank driver, yes,
Tank driver in the war. And, she was an amazing character. But,
Guys, it's been fantastic, but we're going to have to wrap things up for this show. It's great. Can I thank, first of all, Ian Hewitt? Thank you for coming on, telling us about that. And how do we buy Spitfire gin?
Well, you can buy it through our website, which is where we prefer you to buy it, and the website www.spitfireheritagedistillers.com. We market predominantly through the aviation world and the armed forces world. So if you're in an RAF officer's mess, you'll be drinking Spitfire at the bar.
Good stuff. Excellent. And Henry, when's your next article in the magazine?
Article, so the APOA Magazine is it's sort of bi-monthly. I'm in the next one, and I should be in most of them.
Great. Good stuff. Excellent. Well, we're going to be at the Duxford Air Show next week, so if you're around, please do come up and see us and say hello. Till then, if you've got any stories of interest, please do get in touch with us. And don't forget, subscribe to this podcast and channel. Thank you and goodbye. Yay! Good stuff. Well.
This episode was brought to you by the Solent Sky Museum, preserving aviation heritage for future generations.